Get in touch with Tshego on X at @TshegoMoagi_.
You can also give us a call on 0861987000 or send us a WhatsApp voice note on 0833037093 as we speak to some of these matters that affect each and every one of us, indeed, in some way or another. Now, we see a lot of these packages where it looks like fun flavors and seen as socially acceptable and less harmful than tobacco. Vaping is rising at an alarming rate among South African teenagers, putting them, of course, at risk of addiction and harm to their developing brains and mental health. Now, get this, in a survey conducted in 52 high schools across the country, 17.8% of the learners between grades 8 and 12 reported currently using vaping products, with 47% vaping within the first hour of waking, suggesting high nicotine addiction. In addition to this, 36.7% reported having tried vaping previously. The concern here is about one's mental well-being and the young people's mental well-being. Dr. Terry Henderson, specialist child and adolescent psychiatrist, speaking to us about these statistics, but also one's mental health when they are vaping. Dr. Henderson, good evening. Thanks for your time.
Hi, good evening.
So let us first of all start off with vaping versus, cigarettes and so forth. There have been these discussions and, debates that vaping is safer. Is that really the case?
Well, vaping industry came in as supposedly an agent to help stop with smoking. And that's how it was introduced without regulation. But we know that it's not helpful as a cessation aid for stopping smoking. But what it is an entire new way for the tobacco industry to target youngsters to use their products. And the concern with vaping or e-cigarettes, or particularly the pod mods, is that the amount of nicotine they contain is up to 5 times as much as a packet of cigarettes. So it's the concern of how easy it is to use them because they're so accessible. And as I said, you can wake up in the morning and grab your e-cigarette and vape. And made so tantalizing by the industry with lovely odors and colors, and probably slightly cheaper than a packet of cigarettes.
And is that then why vaping, is perceived as more socially acceptable or safer?
Well, it's the sort of thinking is that it's safer, but what we're trying to get across is that it's not in fact safer at all, and in fact it has a higher risk of addiction and has a higher nicotine content than cigarettes. So I think the industry creates this thing of it being safer because it's cute and it's like a small little parcel, and it looks pretty, but it isn't. And the facts tell us that it isn't in any way nicer or less harmful than cigarettes. In fact, probably worse.
You know what you've just said then, Dr. Henderson, is that the reason why we possibly are seeing an increase in vaping among the teenagers in the country?
So the most important thing to teenagers is being around other teenagers.
Yeah.
So often using a substance is one way to be part of a group, because the most important thing is to be part of a group, so that even kids who are not sort of going to easily use substances will end up using something like a vape because it keeps them as part of the social group, and that is the most important thing to them. And the vapes get introduced at a very young age, sort of around about age 12, is the earliest age that people start using, and before. And that's usually this can be a small party at someone's home, or, a small gathering. And often it's the school bathroom where it gets introduced and gets passed around.
What are then sorry, Dr. Henderson, yes?
No, go ahead.
I was just wondering what the effects are then of seeing parents, a teenager seeing their parents, vaping as well. What effect does it have on them? And do you think that it also then shows them that, well, it is socially acceptable, that this is what they can also do? Yeah,
so that's not only a problem associated with vaping, the same comes with cannabis. So If my parents are doing it, then surely it's fine, and therefore it's totally fine for me to be doing it. Therefore, if someone tells me not to vape, why should I listen? Because my parents are vaping, so surely it's fine. The problem with adolescents, if you tell them that it's going to harm you in the long run, being an adolescent is all about being invincible, so they can't see problems down the line. But as we know, with cigarettes, the problems do happen, certainly down the line. But for teenagers and youngsters, the problem there is that your brain is still developing. For your parents, their brain is no longer developing. So for you, your brain is developing, and nicotine is a toxin. So it's going to affect that developmental process, and it is going to have a negative effect on your cognitive outcomes. So it's not a benign process at all.
You do speak about the brain developing, and I'd like for us to then start touching on that very matter, as we speak about teen vaping. Perhaps just explain to us the effects of nicotine on one's developing teenage brain.
Okay, so nicotine is a toxin, and particularly in certain areas of developing brain circuitry. So specifically in areas of the brain that play a role in organization and planning, as well as areas of the brain important for memory, formation of memories. And then, so by impacting those areas, we get poorer functioning and then poorer outcomes, whether that be interpersonally or academically or in a working environment. So nicotine affects those particular areas, as I said, sort of organization and planning, but also impulsivity. So that we often see that for school-aged children in the learning environment tend to focus less, have poorer concentration, and tend to be more impulsive. That has a long-term effect, so that down the line we have difficulties in cognition. Of course, there's association with vaping and anxiety and depression being a sort of bidirectional relationship. And that then creates the risk for further comorbidities, for example, other substance use, where vaping becomes a doorway to the next substance, which is usually cannabis. And that creates that progression of substances, and with that, further mental health concerns. So we create an unfortunate pathway of substance use and mental health challenges that increases as you go along.
There's, of course, a study that has seen that at least a quarter of South African grade 12 learners admit to vaping regularly, both as a social activity and a stress coping mechanism. I then wonder, Dr. Henderson, how did they even get to that point where they're saying this is for them to cope with their stress?
Well, I suppose it gets introduced as a social activity, and then they may find, okay, now actually, I feel maybe a little bit calmer. Oh, okay, maybe I'm stressed, maybe I'll use my vape to calm down. That's a short-lived relief, as we know with any kind of nicotine, that you do feel some sense of relief for perhaps 60 seconds or so afterwards, but then what kicks in after that is the anxiety, because there is that nicotine fall in level. So, and why vaping, the levels of addiction are so much higher, is that within that one pod mod is a packet of cigarettes, so you can just keep going for as long as you need to. You don't have to go and buy another packet of cigarettes. So you would sort of inhale to calm down and then keep inhaling to calm down. Then what eventually happens is that you were smoking to settle your anxiety, but now you're developing anxiety and depressed mood as a result of your smoking. So it becomes this terrible loop that just gets worse and worse until part of that pattern is treated.
And I suppose then, when you speak about the anxiety, the depression, there's also the issue of memory and emotional regulation when it comes to smoke or vaping, and the dangers that it has for teenagers.
So a large part of what teenagers is about is learning about emotions and mood and how to manage your mood and to regulate. It's very difficult to do that when you're moving through cycles of anxiety and have challenges in your mood management, and as the brain develops, you develop skills in terms of regulating your mood. So if brain development is interrupted in any way, it is harder and harder to regulate your mood. Also, if you've had long-standing anxiety and depression as a teenager, it is also harder to regulate your mood the older you get. So that in a situation where you're regularly using a toxin and you're dealing with anxiety and depression, it's both of those factors are going to interrupt your healthy brain development, which now increases our risk for mental health going forward.
Sure. It really is quite mind-boggling, and I wonder how much communication, education is given to these kind of conversations or, this kind of information for teenagers and their parents, Dr. Terry Henderson, when we speak about the dangers of vaping. Do you think there's enough that is being done to spread the word about these dangers?
No, obviously not. I think the vast understanding, the vast feeling amongst most people is that it's fine. This was something that was brought out to help people stop smoking, so therefore it can't be as bad as smoking. What they don't realize is that that's not the truth at all. It is just as bad as a cigarette, if not worse, and addiction is faster with the vaping than smoking would have been. So I think people get the fact that it's a pretty purple color and smells nice makes people think, oh, this can't be. This is like chewing gum. But it's not. One's got to see that the industry has been very clever in the way that it's targeted young people to use nicotine-based substances. And there's absolutely nothing fine about them and nothing okay about them. That message has to come across. Vapes have been banned for youngsters in various countries, and we need to think, it took us 55 years to get the whole cigarette smoking and health concerns under control. We've now really gone back to square one when it comes to nicotine because of the introduction of e-cigarettes. We now have to re-educate an entire new generation about the dangers of nicotine, and it's harder because they're so accessible and they look so appealing and smell so appealing. And of course, every time they bring out a new flavor, then the teen wants to try that new flavor. So it's incredibly destructive marketing or an industry that is incredibly destructive towards a very vulnerable population. It's completely unacceptable.
Are we seeing, Dr. Henderson, that more and more children are vaping in school even?
Yes. So I was going to feel sorry for schools because the most common place for vaping to happen at school is the school bathroom. And that's often where vapes are swapped, and that's where kids go to at break times to vape. So schools are having to introduce quite a lot of teachers having to walk the routes of school bathrooms to make sure that is not happening. And vapes are obviously exchanged on school grounds. Recently, at the school close to where I work, the drains were blocked, and when they went to clean up the operation, found 50 vapes that had been dropped down into the drain. So, and because, as you heard, kids will start vaping when they wake up in the morning, something that you can do throughout the day, so that, in between classes, children are running to grab their vape. A very difficult situation for schools to manage. And of course, unfortunately, it's younger ages that are more effective. So we're looking at, grade 6s and grade 7s, where vapes are being introduced to them on a social level.
Okay. So there's also the concern, isn't there, Dr. Henderson, of a public health crisis if this is not urgently addressed?
Well, it is a public health crisis. I think we just can't see it yet. We can certainly see from those figures that if we're looking at sort of 1 in 4 kids are actively vaping, and half of those, as you said, are vaping as soon as they wake up in the morning. The mental health challenges that we're looking at, as well as the physical health challenges we're looking at, are really, really, really important. It just hasn't sunk in yet exactly what a role this this is playing. The one sort of thing that seems to happen that does immediately stop kids is from a exercise or sporting point of view, the using a vape reduces your lung capacity so that you become breathless more quickly. That is when a teen will quickly learn, okay, this is really not good for me. And if they are keen sportsmen, will immediately stop. But of course, the mental health link is not that quick. But unfortunately, we do need to get this message across.
That's the voice of Dr. Terry Henderson, specialist child and adolescent psychiatrist, as we speak about the threat of teen vaping on their mental well-being and their mental health. What are the long-term consequences, Dr. Henderson, of vaping, especially for teenagers, if it continues unaddressed, if it does not stop? Like you say, if a child is in sports, they may want to consider stopping vaping altogether because of the lung capacity and how it will affect their lung capacity. But if it does go unaddressed, if there aren't the signs that the parents can see that something is happening here and their child is vaping, what are the long-term effects if a child from grade 8 was 13 or so starts vaping socially? Then obviously they get into it a bit more, and they continue with it throughout their high school career and even into adulthood.
Yes, so look, I think there's the two ways of thinking about that. There are the issues related to vaping itself, which, as we spoke about, are on attention and concentration and planning function later on in adulthood. But the other pathway that one has to be concerned about is that vaping, as I said, is a doorstep to other substances. So that vaping increases your likelihood of addiction, not only to vapes, but to other substances as well. So that in itself is a path that carries a lot of risk and consequences in terms of very poor outcomes academically and interpersonally, and in terms of employment opportunities later on. The effect on the developing brain is to affect areas of the brain responsible for planning and organization and for managing impulsivity. So that most adults need to function with a great deal of organization and planning. So if that's part of your brain's functioning is compromised, that affects your ability to work, to parent, and to sustain a good income and to sustain healthy relationships. So they were looking at quite serious consequences from a mental health point of view, and then the other comorbidities that come through with substance use. So worsening depression, ongoing anxiety that is difficult to manage. So we need to think about both of those avenues in terms of managing anything that acts like a toxin to an adolescent's developing brain. That includes traumatic experiences, substances in particular. Now we know that vaping is becoming a significant risk for adolescents and their future abilities.
How can parents then notice that, or parents or even teachers or guardians can notice that there's a change in behavior? Because, from what you're saying, there definitely will be that change in behavior at some point.
So the unfortunate thing about the pod mods came out in 2017, is that they were created to have less plume. And that's less, for example, that's less obvious. I think you know what I'm trying to say. I can't find the words. So you can't actually see that happening. But you can certainly notice a lot of sweet smells. I think that the best thing is, regardless of whether your child is vaping or not, is to have the discussion that this isn't a non-risky. It is highly risky because it's not that easy to pick up unless a lot of parents end up finding out because they find vapes in sock drawers and in school bags. Or, for example, noticing that a little bit of money has gone or taxi money has been used for something else. And then figuring out that, seeing your child with other children and catching them, for example, passing vapes between them. Therefore, parents need to, I think, all be aware of this because it is so easily hidden. And I think to be particularly aware in parties and even small social gatherings, and then to look out for it. And that might be looking amongst the children's belongings, teens' belongings. And then I think about having a conversation about it, regardless. And then, of course, if your teen is vaping, is obviously to talk about it. Hopefully they will at some point stop. If they don't, it needs to be looked at as an addiction, and it needs to be treated like an addiction, just as we would gambling addiction in teens. It needs to be managed on that level. And that might be something that a parent can do alone, or you might need to get help in order to do that.
Mm. What advice then, Dr. Terry Henderson, would you give for teenagers who may be tempted to turn to vaping or already are vaping as a coping mechanism, for stress, or even, doing it socially, or there's some kind of peer pressure that they're going through?
Okay, so my advice would be that most teens will experiment with some form of substance, but teens ultimately make the decision to carry on with something or not. If it is anxiety if it's stress that you're trying to manage through using the vape, it's important to acknowledge that and to get some help for that. So, for example, it's to work out what is making you so anxious. Can we not help you in terms of minimizing that anxiety? Is it stress at school? Is it bullying? Is there a problem at home? Let's try and help you manage anxiety without using a coping mechanism that really isn't good for you. So the first thing is to acknowledge that perhaps anxiety is underneath the need to use the vape, and then to look at how we can really help in a better way to create avenues so that you're not having to resort to vaping. And so it's to encourage teens to recognize that they might be struggling, and then to realize that they actually can help, and for parents to realize that if your teenager is asking for help around something, always to acknowledge it, never to dismiss it or to brush it aside. The teenager is asking for help about anything. They've been brave in doing so and must listen. So we need to help kids when it comes to anxiety and depression, and give healthy coping mechanisms, and give far fewer reasons to grab for a cheap little pink thing to try and make them feel better. So I think it's about probably being more open with why someone is using something, and then finding solutions that are healthier.
Absolutely. And there are those healthier solutions indeed, Dr. Terry. Thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Sure.
Dr.
Okay.
Terry, thank you. Dr. Terry Henderson, specialist child and adolescent psychiatrist, speaking to us about this threat of teen vaping on one's mental health and one's mental well-being.